Welcome to Two Brothers Talking Live. I'm Israel.
And I'm Eli.
Today we're going to be counting down the questions that we had about interviewing, resume building, and candidate position. All the questions we wish that were answered when we were young bucks coming up in the industry. We're still young bucks, but there was a lot of questions that I had as a young person entering the workforce that I wish I had an answer to. Now I do. And so we want to pass that on and make sure that we position you for success, whether it's the first time you're interviewing for a job, or you're a veteran employee that's making a change in your life or going to a new job. Whatever the case may be, we want to make sure to help you. So be sure to ask any questions you have in the live comments below. If you're watching this after on YouTube, send us an email, send us a DM if you have a question that wasn't answered on this live today. All right, so Eli, what is, I guess you could say, the biggest question that you had, wished you had an answer to when you, right off the bat, started your resume?
Honestly, when I first started resumes, I'd already been working for a number of years because I started real early at the ripe age of technically illegal. And I started in doing little odd jobs here and there for a local, hi, Tom, a local, like I think it was like a travel lodge or something. My sister and I, we were together a housekeeper.
Okay.
So she would vacuum, or she would clean and stuff, and I would vacuum, and we'd split the money. I didn't realize until much later I was being ripped off. I
Oh
was like
man,
10.
they're like, hey, great, we can pay
Yeah,
these two kids the same.
Oh no, not by the travel lodge, by my sister. She was giving me like $5 a day, and she was making all this kind of money. But anyway, so it wasn't until I'd already been working for years, because I worked at a restaurant, I worked at a grocery store, doing retail and things like that.
Yeah.
Resumes weren't really something I needed until a few years into working. And I wish back then that I'd known kind of what people were looking for. And I think a lot of the misconception is, oh, if I make myself sound good, I can kind of anticipate what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain degree that's possible, because I mean, there are certain things everyone wants. But one of the funniest things that I'm sure you can attest to anytime we did interviews, because now longer in our careers we do interviews, you ask people, oh, what's your the greatest question of all time, what's your greatest weakness? And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And it's like, anybody can see right through that answer.
Too much.
I care too much. I'm too hard of a worker. Like, okay, what I wish I knew back then, or what I wish I had the foresight to ask, is what's the most important thing?
Yeah.
And honestly, if I could tell myself this, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, it would be attention to detail. Because I have had some resumes I've looked over. I've looked at my old resumes, and the biggest things that I've noticed had the most profound impact was a lack of attention to detail.
Yeah.
And you can be the greatest candidate on earth, but if all we can see is a resume, that lack of attention to detail, misspelled words, terrible grammar, things out of order, things like that. Really, the attention to detail is what's going to set you apart. Because there were some candidates, their resume looked so good.
Yeah.
It's like, this person gets an interview.
Yeah.
Turns out they're not that great of a candidate. They lack experience. They lack all this. But because of the attention to detail, it got them in the door for the interview.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there were some great candidates just lacked that tiny little attention to detail, that during their resume setting up, that they didn't shine through. Because there were some that we hired simply because we had to fill spaces. We had a lot of interviews, and some we hired, even though the resume was like, oh, it's technically words.
Yeah.
Let's get them in the door. And
it's on a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's on a piece of paper. That's
not in crayon,
preferably, or green pen, which is crazy to me. We would have them come in and they'd interview fantastic. They'd have a great skill set. They would be wonderful employees. They'd be working hard. They'd be punctual, but their resume didn't reflect that. So I wish I could have told myself back then, attention to detail.
Yeah.
Take your time. Don't try to be the best thing since sliced bread. Just bank on your strengths, because that's not something I was good at back then.
I was laughing right now when you said grammar, because it reminds me of an episode, and I've seen this before in real life, but it was comical in the episode of Friends. It wasn't necessarily a resume, but it was Joey Tribbiani who was writing a recommendation letter for Monica and Chandler to adopt, and he first wrote it in the best way he knew how, which is he found out how to use a thesaurus and swapped every single word, not just a few, but every single word in his letter. So it was like, these Homo sapiens have a large, what is that? The heart was the proper term for heart or the scientific
I don't
term?
know, like a
Like
pulmonary muscle or
yeah,
something.
aortic valve or something like that, or something like that. And then he signed it
Oh
because his
man.
name was Joey. He changed it to baby kangaroo because I guess that's a
Oh,
baby. A kangaroo's name is a Joey. And
that's
so they're
awesome.
like, we can't even use this. It doesn't make sense. And so just like it's the real thing. I've seen resumes where someone may have used a thesaurus, what is what appears, because they've put in every large word that they could find, but
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. The context is all jumbled up, and that's not something that I I realized until now as I'm looking through resumes that a lot of folks, including us,
Mhm.
just don't know how to write a resume. I remember similar to you, I started out with summer jobs. I had honest people though; they paid me pretty decent. I started with neighbors and friends of the family taking me learning how to do masonry, tile,
Good
anything.
hands-on work.
Yeah, and it was hard work, but it was fun. It paid well for the summer, especially because I was so young. It was like, oh man, all this money. Um, and even in my first job, I didn't have a resume because I didn't have any experience.
Yeah.
I filled out the application on a whim. Really, it wasn't like I needed a job. I was 15. I didn't really need a job, but I was hurt. Couldn't play sports, school, and so my friend had a resume in his truck and was like, or sorry, an application. And so I filled it out. And so I wasn't really thinking ahead to say, oh, I need to get a resume ready, send it out, anything like that. So even into my first professional job, I didn't have a resume. And it
Mm.
wasn't until want to say my second or third job that I did. And I don't even know how I got into my second job. I think it was because the hiring manager had come into the store I was working at the time and saw me work that he's like, he recruited me to his store.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't like I knew I needed a resume or even how to put it together. And so my first resume, I was like, I don't know how to do this, and that's really daunting. Looking for a job in general is stressful,
Yeah.
but
Especially if you're looking for something to maintain, like
yeah,
your lifestyle or feed your kids.
yeah, I think you can get by without a well written resume if you're looking for just any like fast food job. You're in high school, you're looking for some extra income, what have you. But if you're looking for career you're looking for a job where you can grow, there's a long-term potential there. You're going to want a well-written,
Mhm.
put together resume, but not necessarily one that like Joey did. Use the
Yeah.
thesaurus to try to sound
It's on stilts.
different. Be authentic, be yourself is what I wish I would have been told when writing a resume because I didn't go as far as to get a thesaurus, but I tried to sound really smart. I try to
ABC.
sound really experienced. And yeah, I got the job, but it wasn't necessarily what I would have hired someone for if I saw that, or even maybe potentially given him an interview.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of blessed to get by on that. But long term, it's not going to work. Nowadays, if I was applying for a promotion and I turned in a resume I wrote in, 10 years ago, I definitely wouldn't even be considered.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's kind of I'm hearing as a consistent theme between the two of us is your resume needs to match you. Like
Mhm.
I pride myself on having a pretty good vocabulary. I have a wide swath of words I can use. But if you have a fantastic thesaurus filled resume
Yeah.
and then you show up
And you're not
and you do
talking
not
like that.
have that vocabulary, uh, like it's almost kind of already disappointment a little bit because your resume is
You're,
so on
you're
stilts.
catfishing the hiring manager, is what
Yeah,
you're doing.
and so authenticity is very important because honestly, I would rather hire someone with a small vocabulary but an enormous skill set
Mm.
than someone with, they know every word in the English language, which would literally take 80 years, but they can't do the job. I've had people that I hired and had on my team that had degrees
Mm.
uh, or were working towards degrees, but had no skills. I had one that had received a degree during his employment and
Mhm.
immediately came to my office and said I'd like a raise because I have a degree.
Mm.
I was like, that would be something I would consider if, you know, and this is a much different conversation than what I'm just paraphrasing here, but basically you're not fulfilling the skills of your job.
You're not
Yeah,
doing the job.
yeah, you're
So
not doing the job. The degree is a fantastic foot in the door towards like interviews and getting hired. However, you need the skill set.
yeah,
So there has to be some kind of authenticity, it has to gel together. Otherwise, uh, like you're saying you painted the Sistine Chapel, and then instead of Michelangelo, you show up and you're Michael. And like, oh, okay, you're a little bit of a different person than I expected.
I think that's it reminds me of my first interview, not necessarily me showing up to be the wrong person, but
We were looking for Tiffany. You're like, who are you?
it's just me. That's my nickname. I was going to my first interview and I didn't know how to act. And that is a
Mm,
big question that I had going in too was how do you interview?
yeah.
Like
How do you
what do
behave?
you even exactly behave? How do you say? What do you not say? What are some taboo topics to maybe not bring up? Because that automatically in the hiring manager's mind, like culture fit, I don't know. Motivational fit, I don't
I
know.
think that could be an episode in and of itself.
We'll put that in our notes. We'll make sure to kind of talk about that in whole. But in terms of questions I had about interviewing, um, I think the biggest one for me was how do I present myself?
Hmm.
Obviously, my dad taught me you go with your tie. If you have a suit, put on a suit. You comb your hair, get a haircut if you can. Um, Try to look like you're looking for a job,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to go in a t-shirt and ripped jeans if you're looking to be taken seriously. And so the big question for me was once I get in, because I know how to dress, my dad taught me, but how do I present myself outside of being respectful in manners and what have you? Like, what do you, if they ask what's the reason you left, how do you answer that? So that was something that when going into my third job, because my second job, he didn't care. He's like, hey, I'll recruit you from this job to this job because they're competitors. I don't care why you're leaving. I know why you're leaving
Because I'm taking
because
you.
I'm taking you. But my third job was like, why did you leave your previous job? And why did you leave your first job that was similar to this job? And so I wasn't prepared to answer those types of questions.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And so that's the thing that I wish I would have heard was a little bit of tips on how I could answer that questions truthfully, sticking to that authenticity, but also not bashing your former employer, especially if the reason you left is because maybe your culture there was extremely toxic.
Mm.
Maybe you needed to get out. Maybe they treated employees poorly, you know, and you don't want to badmouth your former employer, whether or not it's true or not. That's just something out of professional courtesy you don't do. It's easier when you're leaving because you're looking for somewhere you can grow. Like if you're leaving a fast food place to go to a corporation where you have growth potential,
Mm.
you can say, you know what, I was looking for career longevity. I'm starting a family. I want to be sure that I can plan ahead in the future and know that I have room to grow. That's easier to answer. But how do you answer if the reason you left is because of the boss, basically?
I would say, and I'm going to lead with something. Anyone who's ever been trained by me or spent time in my classroom, you've probably heard this before. You know what I'm going to say. That buses are very heavy. Don't throw anyone under one. That it doesn't matter what they've done. It doesn't matter, how bad they were. What you bringing that up means is it's a commentary on your character, not
Yeah.
theirs. So if I bring up, like, let's say I've had leaders and I've had managers who would pull me from my tasks just to yell at me for not doing my
Mm.
tasks at that moment. And, like, just things that would baffle you.
You're like, come over here for a second.
I need to
Why
yell at
aren't
you.
you back over there doing your job?
Exactly that situation, which just baffled me. And so I've had leaders and managers that would do that kind of stuff that were just really petty. But when I would go into an interview, and this is something I had to learn later on too, through feedback from interviews, that if I would go into that interview and even if they deserved it, if I bashed them, it said nothing about them. It said everything about me. So when leaving, be honest, while at the same time, don't include throwing someone under the bus
Yeah.
and kind of put it under the guise of honesty.
Mm.
Uh, it's very easy to say, I left because this person was a terrible boss. While it may be accurate, it's not going to be helpful to you.
Yeah.
Instead, I would offer, think of other ways, and this is kind of where you get that thesaurus out. Think of other ways to explain the situation. So, without throwing someone under the bus, I left because I didn't quite gel with the culture.
Yeah.
I left because I saw a better opportunity elsewhere. Okay, well, why is that opportunity better? It matched my needs better.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, my needs to not be yelled at by a boss every
Yep.
5 minutes. I got that need. You probably do too.
Yep.
But thinking of ways to phrase things in a positive light, and that sometimes is a skill that you have to develop. It's not something going to come automatically, but uh, I would shy very, very far away from bad mouthing people, even
Yeah.
if in your mind they deserve it, because it's just not great. And I would also say, just to fall back on one thing you talked about earlier, the how to present myself, I actually learned not so much from my dad, but I actually learned this from how would you show up to court?
Okay.
Because there's two different kinds of people that show up to court. Those that show up with kind of a reverence towards the court. They show up in, in a suit and tie, or even just a dress shirt and a tie. They say Your Honor. They say, ma'am, sir, things like that. And then there's
Mm,
those who show up in jeans and a t-shirt and like, oh no, yeah, but like there's no respect for the establishment.
yeah.
And if you're asking this company to give you money to work there has to be respect involved.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have, this styled Italian suit to go into an interview. I hired people that you can tell that this may have been their first button down shirt they've ever worn,
Hmm.
but I could tell from the interview that they wanted this job.
Yep.
And you don't have to, spend hundreds of dollars to get ready for an interview. Just, show up like you respect the establishment.
Yep.
And you'll probably have your best foot forward. There has to be that honesty. And as I said before, there has to be that authenticity there where, hey, I'm asking you to give me money so I can do work for you. Show a little bit of respect there while at the same time not bashing whoever you left. And also make sure that you're not, and this should go without saying, but just to throw it out there, make sure you're not lying. Lies very seldom get you anywhere,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to keep track of multiple lies.
Mm,
So if you're talking about your history, don't lie about it. Be honest,
that's true.
because there's a lot to be said about someone who made a mistake and learned from it. I would rather take the person who said, "Well, why'd you quit working here?" Honestly, it was a mistake.
Blew it.
Yeah, I blew it. I made some mistakes. I got in trouble with the management, and they terminated me rightfully. They
Mhm.
rightfully terminated me because of my behavior.
Yeah.
I've learned from that. I've taken it as, you know what, I made some mistakes. I needed to grow up a little bit, and I've since applied that to my life. I would love to have that person because that tells me they're honest,
Yeah.
they're self reflective, and they're willing to take that feedback and apply it. So honestly, even if you make mistakes, owning up to it really puts you in a good line as well.
I've taken risks on people that have come in with maybe not the best track record in their last role. Maybe they got fired, but they're honest up front. They're like, "Hey, there's a large gap here, and the reason I left is because X, Y, Z. But this is what I've learned from it. This is what I've been trying to do, and I'm ready to try again somewhere where it's going to give me a chance. And I'm willing to take a risk on someone that can be honest with me.
Yep.
Um, I think you brought up a good point when you're talking about embellishing things. Going back to the resume thing, don't embellish it. If you didn't do something, like if you didn't lead a project, you were just someone that was a part of it. Don't say you led it. Like
Yeah.
don't put things out there that you think the hiring manager wants to hear. And the reason is because they might call you on it. I've specifically asked pointed questions about things in terms of if I feel like the resume is extremely embellished or polished, I'll drill down a little bit more into that background because I want to know, is this surface level? Is this just for the interview or is there substance there? And the reason I do that is because in a team environment, we rely on everybody being honest with one
Yeah.
another. Hey, why didn't you complete this particular portion of the task or the project? And if you're not honest, you're like, you blow them off or you embellish something. There's a trust that's broken there. And when trust is broken on a team, the team can't operate at its fullest. And so I think that when you're writing your resume and then you go into the interview, be prepared to talk through some of the things in your resume deeper than just tell me about your last job. They might ask you, okay, what specific thing did you do? You said you led it. Talk to me about the things that you did to lead the team. How did you organize your team? How did you time manage? How did you put your team together? What decisions did you have to make as a leader that you might have struggled with? And so, because I know what it takes to put together a team, I know what it takes to lead a team. I want to know if what they're telling me on their paper has some substance to it because
Yeah.
hey, if they're a leader and they have that experience, they have an opportunity to grow and they have an opportunity to maybe put into a role where they lead in a capacity that someone else might not have because of the experience they have. So don't embellish, don't lie. I think Lily mentioned in a comment earlier, authenticity is something that we talked about. We talk, excuse me, a lot is be yourself.
Yeah, and don't try to be the smartest, slickest person in the room. Something that I saw going around on Instagram was explaining your position as I handle transactions for a multi-billion-dollar company. No, you were a cashier at McDonald's. Be honest about it. Like, because you have to understand that if you say that you did this lofty thing, that's the expectation of your
Yeah.
character. So you have to understand that the person that's interviewing, especially depending on the job you're going for, they may have done that thing you're asking about. So their expectation is, oh, so he knows what I know.
Yeah.
Or he, as your example, he was a leader. Oh, so he knows about leadership strategies.
Yep.
He knows about conflict resolutions. They're going to
Yep.
ask you those pointed questions that you won't have answers for,
Yep.
which can really, even if you may be very apt and capable to do that job, now you're at a lesser standing because effectively you lied.
Yeah.
You were dishonest. And people are like, well, I didn't lie. I left stuff out. That's called the lie of omission. So not technically telling the truth is still being dishonest. So just try to be honest. If you're a cashier at McDonald's, be a cashier at McDonald's. It's an honest work. It's an honest dollar. I really feel like we're just hitting the authenticity over the head here, but that's because it's necessary.
Hermes asks a good question, and we've talked about this on a couple episodes, in season 1, season 2 as well. The fake it till you make it mentality, and I want to jump into this because we've said on our show we're not necessarily anti fake it till you make it, but we don't believe in that. And the reason, it goes back to authenticity. Be real with what you don't know, so you can get the help that you need. And if you fake it till you make it, you can't get the support.
Yep.
You can't get the resources. You can't get maybe even the feedback that might be crucial to your development because you're faking it. You're putting up a front. Be honest about not knowing whatever it is that you don't know. Go in and say, "Hey, I have questions." I remember my wife got it was like a humorous award at the end of training. I think it was something like the most questions asked award, and folks were making a joke about it. But someone like that asks questions when they don't know, it shows me they're committed to growth, that they're committed to the success of your organization because they want to soak up as much information that they can so they can succeed for you. And so the whole fake it till you make it, I think that was, well, good intentioned. It's setting people up for failure. Hopefully that answered your question, Hermes. Again, if you're doing that right now, I want to challenge you. Just take a step back and evaluate, is that the best thing for your development? Or maybe asking for help if that's going to help you in the long run. I laughed earlier when you were talking about embellishing and whatnot, because again, goes back to shows, The Office. Daryl was applying for a manager position. Thank you, Hermes. We appreciate that. She said, well said. Daryl is trying to get into this, I think it's the regional manager role, and Joe Bennett is like processed and handled 2 billion units of something. She goes, 2 billion units, Daryl? And he goes, of what? She goes, of what? And he goes, of paper material, ma'am. And she goes, paper material? You transported paper, essentially. Like, she's calling him out on it. And so, like, we can recognize right off the bat if that resume has been embellished. You don't need to try to use big words. If you, like Eli said, you worked as a cashier, that's fine. I worked as a cashier for a number of years. I loved my job, and I appreciate what I learned because as a cashier, you're subject to a lot of customer-facing issues, and you're the one that needs to resolve it to make sure that customer has a positive experience and the people around them have a positive experience. I remember one time, and I used this example in my interview for the company I'm working for now, and it blew the mind of the hiring manager at the time. I was a cashier. I had to be 17. And this, if anybody's worked in retail, you know that especially in Arizona, we have what we call snowbirds, that folks that come in from out of state, like Oregon, Canada, and they stay for the duration of the winter because it's warmer for them here than it is where they live. And they permeate every store, the streets. Like, they bring in a third of our economy. We count on them for a third of our economy. And so we appreciate them. Sometimes they can get a little aggressive in terms of sales, in terms of discounts.
Pocket pension, yeah.
And so, here I am enforcing, what I was told was the way policy of discount worked. And at the time, I was a little less tactful. I didn't have the art of communication down packed. I still don't. But I communicated in the most respectful way possible. Ma'am, I'm sorry, you can't use these two discount coupons in conjunction with one another because they essentially just cancel each other out. And she got extremely mad and threw her coffee onto me and on the counter. And the good thing was I was wearing a
Like
an apron. So I wasn't that burned. My legs got a little burned. It was pretty hot. But I had a moment like I could go off on this lady and lose my job, or I could look around and say, you know what? I can handle this in a professional way and make the experience maybe better for her in the long run. Who knows what kind of date? Not saying what she did was right. No excuses for what she did, but I wanted to be the bigger person. So I said, you know, I apologize. Feel that way. Let me get a manager. Talk to you because she was asking for a manager at that point. And so because the manager, you know, knew that she threw coffee on me, that customer got escorted out. But the other customers around her started applauding. And as they started to go through, they're like, you know, we've never seen a teenager handle the situation like that, but we applaud you because it shows that you care about the company you work for and the reputation they have. And so I used that example in my hiring manager was like, whoa, you know, that was pretty neat. I would have gone off on the lady. But like you learn a lot of useful experience from jobs like cashiering,
Mhm.
from customer facing roles that I apply now in my job, like 10 years down the line. And so there's no shame in where you start. It's, you know, if that's what you got to do to pay the bills, that's what you got to do to pay the bills.
And honestly, there's a lot of skills that you learn and a lot of appreciation that comes with working those jobs. I was part of I worked in training for a number of years, as our listeners probably know. We had some kids straight out of high school come and work for our company as part of a internship
Yep.
program. And one thing that I noticed is these kids, having never worked before, they didn't appreciate 40 hours a week, a consistent paycheck, a consistent schedule. While I was their age, I would have killed for it. And a
Yeah.
lot of people, a lot of our listeners probably would have killed for a consistent schedule, a consistent paycheck, and 40 hours guaranteed.
Yep.
They didn't appreciate
Health
it.
insurance.
Yeah, health insurance. Instead of saying, "Oh man, I get 40 hours," their attitude was, "I have to work 40 hours." And instead of getting a consistent paycheck, like, "Oh man, I have to work 40 hours," because again, that was the big thing for them. So in working those jobs, that tells me you're going to appreciate what you have here.
Yeah.
So understand that chances are the person you're interviewing probably worked something similar to that at some point. So they've been there.
Yeah.
They know what it can bring. Those kind of things are really helpful. We have a question. I'm sorry, that's a little small. Could you read that for me?
It's Juliet commenting. Lily Olvera was better than I in our initial role in our company because she asked the questions while I hung back quiet in training.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point because there's a lot of folks in your training class that have a question, or if you're not in a training class in the area that you're going to be in that you're learning, whatever the case may be for your company. But you might be asking a question that everybody in the room has that somebody might not have the courage themselves to ask at that moment, or they don't know how to phrase like the questions in their mind. But this is something I struggled with is it was up here, but I didn't know how to get it out of my mouth. Like, how does that like make sense? How do I do words? And think to someone like Lily, like they aren't afraid. Like it's like, I need help. Nothing's gonna stop me from getting help.
Yeah.
And so you never know who else you're helping in that class or that environment when you to have the courage and take that step forward and ask that question. Don't be afraid of ridicule. Don't be afraid of what people may think, because I guarantee if you look around 5 years later, those people won't be there no more. Or if they are, they're miserable and they're doing the bare minimum because they didn't have the courage to step out and say, I need help.
As the time I spent in classrooms and in training rooms and things like that, the people that I appreciated and understood and was able to help the most ask questions.
Mm.
The people who don't ask questions are in my experience, one of three different types of people. There are those who just simply have the question, they don't know how to get it out. And I can completely understand that. I've been there. There have been times like words are hard and it's difficult to really articulate what it is you're struggling with or what you have a question about. There are those who think they already know the answer and don't want to question because I already know. And those people typically don't last very long because in assuming they know, they're not receptive to feedback. They're not receptive to leadership because even if they were, they ran a company before, coming in with the attitude of I already know better than this person, that's going to get you a swift kick out the door because if you're not receptive to feedback or direction, that's going to continue in your career. I've had people that came through my classroom and never asked questions, and I would try and direct them, and they just stop me at the door. They'd be like, "No, I'm good." And then when they got into the position, they would struggle, they would fail, they would get, assistance from their leader and just deny it. And eventually they didn't work there anymore. And
Yeah.
I saw that as kind of a repetitious thing, a revolving door, is you need to be receptive to feedback. And the third type of person that didn't ask questions was the person who, how to phrase this delicately,
Get to the source.
huh?
Get to the source.
Get to the source. Yeah. They would fake it till they make it. And
Yeah.
they would not know, be too embarrassed to ask. And I understand there's some embarrassment in asking, but it's better to do that. And they would fake it till they make it. And the one thing I found about faking it till you make it is the longer you do it, the worse it gets.
Oh yeah.
Because the longer I pretend to know what I'm doing, the bigger my mistake becomes when I finally make it, because you're going to make a mistake. It just depends on when. So it's a lot better to make the mistake early. We would have this thing in training where we want you to fail quickly. So you can make the mistakes now so we can learn from while it's still fixable. But if I fake it till I make it, the longer I take to admit that I'm wrong, the worse it gets, because the last thing we want is someone who's been here for 2 years saying, yeah, I never actually knew how to do this, because then we'd say, you've been lying to us for 2 years, basically.
Yeah. That's
so
true.
the longer those people would fake it, the worse it would become. And no one in your leadership has any misconceptions about you being able to do your job. We all know that you're faking it majority of the time. We're just waiting for you to be honest. So working and training gave me a lot of insight into the different people that are hired.
Yeah.
And I would really just advocate, ask as many questions as you can. Even if you think there are dumb questions, the only thing I ever consider as a dumb question would be the question you've already asked 5 times because you want a different answer.
Oh yeah.
That's the only question I see as unhelpful or unnecessary, is because I'm asking the same question because I want a different answer. If you got the answer, that's the answer. Outside of that specific type of question, you won't learn unless you ask. And it's a really helpful thing to do.
I think even to the leadership aspect of it, like flipping it, we've talked about, if someone's struggling, ask the questions. But leaders, I want to talk to you for a second. If someone is struggling, create the environment where they feel safe to ask those questions.
True.
The way you do this is when someone asks a question, don't be like, oh, yes, so-and-so, what is it? Like, don't do that, because then everybody else, including that person, is like, well, I don't want to ask. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to be put on the spot. Or you don't want to create a culture where people are afraid to approach you. One of the big learnings I had as a leader is body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice are huge. People are watching, and even if you don't mean it, if you're not intentional about those things, it's going to come across as you're unapproachable. That happened to me, and that was, I think I shared that on an episode a while back this season, was the feedback I got. I was cold, I was arrogant, and I was unapproachable. I was none of those things, but what I was portraying, because I wasn't being intentional about what I was doing, what I was saying, and how I was carrying myself, mattered. And it created this culture where I wasn't someone that people could feel safe around. Not necessarily like I was going to attack them or something, but to be their authentic self. And I think that's something that us leaders, we need to do, be intentional about the culture that we're creating by how we react. And that's a struggle. Lily says she's a strong believer, and there's no such thing as a dumb question as long as it's a genuine question. That's huge. One of my dad has always, told me, son, ask questions, or he'll ask me, do you have any questions?
Yeah. That's
like,
going to be the next thing I was going to say. Make a forum so people can ask questions.
That's what a leader does, is like, hey, let me make time. Let me be intentional about when I am taking the time to make sure, not like after you talk about an hour of topics, okay, anybody have any questions? Like, nobody wants to talk about that. But one of the things that I've seen in Eli's training is he'll cover a topic in brief summary, and then, okay, what questions do you have about this? Or what can I answer about this? Making sure it's clear, and he'll phrase it in different ways so people that might not understand that it's okay to ask a question, phrase this way, but phrase this way they do. He does a really good job at that. And so leaders, you've got to create that culture where your employees are they feel safe, where they can be their authentic self and say, I have a question, I need help. Because if that culture is not there, it doesn't matter how many questions someone has, they won't ask it if they don't feel safe to do it.
And another way to encourage question asking is if someone asks a question, and some people just, and this is more to the leaders again, Some people won't ask questions in a group just because they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
So spend and invest time in one-on-ones.
Yes.
Where again that forum is open. One-on-ones should not just be a download; it should be a dialogue.
Yep.
Where I'm giving information and I'm receiving information. Okay, what kind of information do you need? What kind of questions do you have? What can I answer for you? While at the same time, uh, if someone does ask a question in an open environment like a meeting or something like that, a good way to encourage it is simply saying, "Great question,"
Yeah.
or "Thank you for asking. I want to make sure to answer that."
Mhm.
Simple little things like that, and it can feel a little uncomfortable if it's not something you do often. That's okay. New things are often a little uncomfortable, but one thing I got in the habit of doing is if someone asks a question, great question,
Yeah.
and that simple little encouragement not only encourages them to ask questions, but encourages everyone because they're hearing from me. I value
Yep.
you looking for more information. It's a really easy way to convey that you want that info.
Yeah. We've 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we get to this question and also be able to kind of talk about or marketing yourself as a candidate, or as I called it, candidate positioning.
Yeah.
So this question says, as a leader, what expectation should you set with your employees when you're busy, unavailable, and struggle with perception of being unapproachable? This is something I struggle with a lot, a lot. And it's because you have a job to do. You have a job to do. You're accountable to get that job done. But you also have to be available for your employees. At the time, I had 16 direct reports that my part of my job was to answer questions they had.
Yeah.
They had customers on the other line. And so I think the best thing that I learned from that experience was I need to invest time in those one-on-ones, making sure there's clear expectations on what my role is. So role clarity, so they know I'm not Israel's not just sitting at his desk, typing away. There's things that need to get done to support the team, to support the organization. But at the same time, I am 100% available to you. But as a leader, it's my job to develop you, to develop your peers. And so be intentional about the time you spent in developing your workforce to be able to self sustain, essentially. And we had what we call the skills matrix, where we rated employees on a 1 to 4 scale on how proficient they were in certain tasks of their job as a whole. And so spend time in developing your employees in key areas where they have strengths in and their opportunity areas, but more so for this specific conversation, their strengths. And the reason I say that is because then when people have questions, you can either have them rely on the resources, or they can rely on their peers who have the strength in the area they might not have, and they can go to them and say, hey. And so you set the expectation, hey guys, I'm completely available, but between 1 and 2 I have this task that I need to get done because there's this deadline. So I'm going to make sure that my skills matrix fours folks, or whatever you're going to call it, my peer leaders are available to you, so that way if you can't find it in your resources, they're going to be here.
And investing in those people, and this is something I had to learn in one of my first leadership roles, was it's okay and it's good to have people who can do your job. And the reason I say that is because you want to create
Yeah.
people who can step
Yeah.
in your absence, for a couple of reasons. The first is for those exact situations where I'm not available, but someone needs to be able to take the helm and field that question or field that concern because they're familiar enough with the work
Yeah.
that they're able to kind of mitigate that, coming to me because I may be otherwise occupied. And the second reason is because you can't move up if no one can replace you.
Ooh.
That's something
That's
I had to
big.
learn is I can't get promoted if no one can take my job. We often see, well, this company would fall apart without me as a good thing. Realistically, if the company would fall apart without you, the next step for your leadership development is to develop someone to replace you. Not out of fear for, this is something I had to learn, is not out of fear of being replaced, but out of hopefulness to be replaced.
Yes.
Because I wasn't able to move into a different role unless someone could do my job. So there's several, and probably more we're missing here, but there's several benefits to investing and developing your people so that they can be self-sustaining. I think yours is
Yeah.
great points to be self-sustaining, self-directing, and also someone to take over your role, because that doesn't just look good for you as promotional prospects, but it makes you effective as a leader.
Yeah.
And it makes sure that you know your stuff. It's the best way to find out if you know something is to teach someone else. So you'll often find ways you need to kind of adjust yourself as you teach someone to take that role.
Yeah, and I think that leads us right into candidate positioning, like positioning yourself for the best and the most attractive candidate out there, whether or not you're applying for a job. You want to be on the forefront of um, hiring managers' mind. And we had a question: any recommendations for stay-at-home reentering the workforce? And so we'll talk about that here. Positioning yourself for the best candidate, whether it's you're coming home, you're a stay-at-home parent, or you're maybe you got laid off during the pandemic layoffs
Yep.
and you're entering for the first time. Uh, I think going back to authenticity, that's important. So get with a resume writing resource. In town, we have a place that helps folks put those things together.
Hmm.
I think it's Arizona Back to Work or something like that. Um, or they call it WIPIC. Something they call it
Something like that.
right. There's resources available in your city that help with resume writing. Sit down and get some help with the resume. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Start looking at opportunities that you had to showcase skill sets in places that you might not have, thought of before. So if you're a stay-at-home parent, you have time management skills,
Budgeting.
you have budgeting, you have decision making, conflict resolution if you have kids. Like there's skills that you have as a parent that some of the people that I've seen and worked alongside don't have.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a single parent, because you're doing everything yourself. So if you're stay at home or entering the workforce, get a list, get a sheet of paper and write down everything you do on a daily basis. And I guarantee you have marketable skills to go in and say, hey, yes, I don't have any direct experience, say necessarily in data analytics, but I can project manage the heck out of a project
Yeah.
because I have strict deadlines. Like I have things I need to do in a short period of time because I take care of people. So you have direct reports essentially. And so you have those coaching conversations. If your kid's misbehaving, you're developing them into strong and law-abiding citizens, And so you sit down, create a list of all the things that you do because those skills are marketable. Now, if you're a candidate that's already in an organization and you want to market yourself for any potential roles, one of the things that I learned right off the bat is always continue your education. I'm not necessarily talking about signing up for university classes. If you do that, that's great. But I'm talking about always being in a learning state. And it goes
Yep.
back to asking those questions when you don't know what you don't know. That's really it. And so ask questions. We have in our company, it's like a third party site that we can go to for development. Spend time, carve it out in your calendar for development and be able to market those skills. One of the things that I was told as a young candidate was make sure your tool belt is full, regardless if you're looking for a job
Yeah.
or not, because hiring managers are always looking. They're always looking. They're always on a scouting mode. And so being able to have that tool belt with you, have that skill set ready and available when you need it is crucial.
I think one thing that kind of really sticks out, and regardless of whether it's you're starting the workforce, you're in it, and you're trying to move up, things like that. You can't always be the best candidate. You can't always be the smartest. You can't always be the fastest or the strongest. You can always be the most prepared. You can always be the most resourceful. So I would rather have 5 people who don't know everything but can get the answer than have 20 people who know everything.
Yeah.
Truth be told, because your resourcefulness is what's going to set you apart from those who uh, just try to know everything, because at a certain point they will meet their barriers, and if they don't know how to get answers because they're so used to knowing everything, they don't know where to go for those resources.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not know things. If you're coming back into the workforce and working at home or being at home, if you don't know something, just find resources that can help you. That resourcefulness, skill building, will be what sets you apart from those who may know a lot of stuff but they don't have resources.
Yeah.
And I think that's our last question, right?
Yeah, we'll close out with this question. It comes from Laura. When it comes to resume building, do we utilize general resume we have, or should we do you recommend we restructure it based on the position we're applying for? I'll let you take this one.
For this one, I would say any position you're applying for, cater that resume to that position.
Yep.
It's easy to have one general resume, but honestly, I would only use that as a template. I would have a general resume that I work off of. If I'm going to apply for data analytics, I'm going to cater my experience that has data analytics in it.
Yep.
If I'm going to apply for a training position, I'm going to cater that resource or that resume So it shows why I'm a good candidate. I would always cater that resume to whatever it is I'm applying for. And that also makes sure that you're focusing and thinking through what you're applying for. If you're not sure what that job requires, ask people.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask leaders, "Hey, I'm interested in this job. Could I get more information about it?" That shows that you're forward thinking, you're being resourceful. Going back to those tips, and you're being honest. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. So that's already going to put you on that leader's radar. Okay, they're interested and they're serious about it.
Yep.
But from my perspective, I've always had the best effect, and I've always, when people ask about resumes, I always say cater it to what you're applying for.
Absolutely. Hope that answered your question, Laura. If it didn't, send us a DM. Check out our show on YouTube. We'll make sure to post this so that if you weren't able to join us for our live episode, you can watch that on the rewatch there. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is where you can reach us. You can reach us by email. It's on our website. Take a visit there. We appreciate you joining us and hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Enjoy your holidays.